We're talking to Dr. Doug Klahr. Can you tell us what you do and how you engage students?
Okay, well, I'm an associate professor in the School of Architecture in the newly formed College of Architecture, Planning and Public Affairs. And I have a PhD in architectural history, but that encompasses everything, including current events. So I teach a wide variety of courses, everything from modern and contemporary Mexican architecture to, I don't know, slum housing in the developing world, for instance, in addition to traditional architectural history courses. And one of the things I like to do is, it's difficult to get students to do the readings sometimes, and you don't want to sound like a high school teacher. So I will tell the students, say 2 days ahead of class, that listen, focus on these pages in particular, because we're going to have a class debate. And I'm going to split the class up into 2 teams. You're going to be arguing these points. I'm not going to tell you which team you're going to be on. So prepare your arguments, because you may be on a team defending a point of view that you really disagree with. And that seems to work really well, because we come into class, I might go over the reading a little bit, and then I say, okay, I'm going to divide the class, and sometimes it's alternating rows, sometimes it's left side, right side, front and back. They never know how I'm going to divide the class. And then I say, we're going to take 15 or 20 minutes, we're going to just have the 2 groups separate and discuss your points of view, and you have to defend this or attack this point of view. So for instance, we're looking at architecture in the 1950s, domestic architecture houses, and the picture window, which was sort of a cliche. And we did an extensive reading on it, on the pluses and minuses of this. And one side was going to defend it, and another side was going to attack that. And most students would probably want to be on the side attacking it, because it's sort of a cliche, it's 1950s, sort of boring, every person's sort of house, it's not innovative architecture. And that's the point, because in a school of architecture, so much of their studio work is based upon hero worship, the leading architects in each era that were innovators, and ignoring the 99% of the rest of the architects who practiced and the people for whom they built, which were not necessarily cutting edge, but still satisfied a lot of needs. So I'm a big hero worship destroyer. Every student knows that. I tear down the famous architects, but with good reason. Never just out of malicious intent. And it forces my students to look beyond the little walls of a school of architecture, which is always very inward-looking, toward the bigger world. So if we're looking at a modernist house built in the 1950s by Mies van der Rohe that's world famous, well, I'm going to show them the 99% of other houses that were built where people lived in, and were very happy living in those. So oftentimes I force my students to take views that they never get in studio, because they're contrary to the pedagogy, the canon of architectural history, particularly modernism, that is so ingrained in studio instruction. And you go back to studio, hopefully, with maybe a more jaundiced or cynical view of hero worship, which I think is very, very healthy. And they learn a lot about why architecture only is really involved with about 2% of what we build in this country. The rest of it is not built by architects necessarily. And they have to understand that they are in a very hermetically sealed environment often. And they're talking to themselves. And their professors are talking to each other. And we bring in professors from other schools to judge the juries. And they're talking to each other, but not to the larger public. So by doing these debates, I call them, or I even call them a war sometimes. We're going to have the war of the window panes or not. Do you want a large piece of glass in your window, or do you want to cut into panes? And how does this affect the whole composition? How does it affect how you look outside to the view, to your garden, perhaps, if you have panes of glass versus one piece of glass? And the default answer today is always, I'd rather have a large piece of glass and just wall-to-wall glass. Well, that doesn't work very well sometimes, and here is why. And then, for instance, we'll go into that and we'll say, well, it's nice during the daytime, but at night, you're going to see a reflection of yourself just in the mirror. And it's going to be very distracting, and you're going to feel terribly exposed if you're out there all alone and you just have a big pane of glass. Whereas if you had different panes of glass, it would break the view up. And we get into all these issues. And so I find dividing them into 2 groups often really helps.
They get that other perspective, the disadvantages.
Absolutely, which they often don't get. And then the other thing I do is I have them give student presentations. We sign up in the beginning of the semester with a building that you want to do. They have 10 minutes to give their presentation. They know I have a very strict grading sheet that I send out to them ahead of time. We do the schedule so there are 2 to 3 people presenting once a week. And that really breaks up the class. It's not my class anymore, it's their class. and we discuss each presentation afterwards in the building that was covered. Exactly, and they're not allowed to do any buildings by the famous architects that they love. They are required to, we have a book that they use, 363 buildings in America, something like that. And there's a long list of architects that they're prohibited from using as their examples. So again, I'm forcing them to go outside the ones that they know. I don't want them to just, oh, this is so easy. I've done this in studio 2 years ago, I can do it now. I don't want that. And I want them to be able to explain the major aspects of a building that may be an architect that they never heard of before. And most of them are doing it really, really well.
You're really broadening their thinking.
I'm trying to in many, many ways. And so it goes along with course content, but also how we actually do the class itself. And in my slum housing course, we did the same sort of thing. We had groups talking about slum housing policy in India. And one group defending a certain policy, and another group attacking it, and why. And these are things they would never discuss in studio. But it's all part of the larger thing of what we call the built environment, you know.
Yeah,
and
I think we're moving towards interdisciplinary thinking.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is part of what I'm trying to do.
Okay, great. I love it. Thanks.
Well, thanks a lot. Sure.